Okay, welcome back to the virtual residency workshop for 2021 at the introductory, intermediate, and advanced level. This is the mid-morning session, and our topic is strategic thinking and visioning. Our moderator is Claire Mizumoto, and I'm going to turn the show over to Claire. Go ahead, Claire.
Great, thank you, Henry. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to bring the strategic visioning and paneling session to the VR workshop today. Let's see, regarding the format, I have several questions that I've shared with the panel. And I'm gonna put, as soon as I find it, I'm gonna put the link in the chat so you guys can follow along at home. And if you have any questions, you can put them also in the Google Doc. So that you can see that there's several more questions than we probably will have time. So I'm hoping the speakers will answer your questions or any questions that we don't address online in the doc. Oh, and this session goes to 15 after the hour. That's 12:15 Central Time. And I think that's it for the housekeeping. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to host these particular panelists today. So in order to maximize our time with them, I'd like to have each of them start by saying hello, giving their name, position, and institution. And we'll learn more about them and their institution as they answer their questions. Burali, would you like to start?
Hi, I'm Burali Runesha. I'm the Associate Vice President for Research Computing and the Director of the Research Computing Center of Chicago.
Great, thank you. Tom, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Cheatham, University of Utah. I'm a professor in the Department of Medicinal Chemistry, a developer and large-scale user of AMBER for biomolecular simulation and force field optimization. I also, for the past, I think 7 years now, have been Director of Research Computing in the Center for High Performance Computing at the University of Utah, and I'm also chair of the Campus Research Computing Consortium. Stop there.
Thanks, Tom. Anne, would you like to go?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Ann Kowalczyk, Chief Information Officer at the University of California, Merced.
Thanks, Anne. Wallace?
Hi, everybody. My name is Wallace Chase. I'm the head of IT infrastructure here for the University of Otago in New Zealand, in Dunedin, New Zealand. I'm also a site manager for the New Zealand eScience infrastructure group, which supports HPC throughout all the universities in New Zealand, sponsored by the New Zealand federal government.
Great, thanks, Wallace. So our first question, Burali, I'm gonna maybe direct it to you first. If you were to consider your leadership approach, what percentage would you say was reactionary or responsive, and how much is proactive or entrepreneurial? And how important is it to drive change to be successful? Oh, you're on.
I'm muted. So thank you, Claire, for that's a very good question, actually. And one that's actually, when I think about it, I like to say to myself that I like to be proactive, to be entrepreneur in trying to anticipate in addressing issues. However, the nature of our job, though, has a little bit of reactionary, meaning when you're supporting faculty and then you're trying to make sure all those faculty are being happy, you can never anticipate what are the issues that come. So there is a bulk of the nature of the job itself. It's at the core reactionary, which means I don't know what exactly will be the percentage, but I would say, I mean, if I had to err, it's like I try to minimize the reactionary as much as I can, but be more proactive. And the thing I also want to add to this is it's not just a matter of really saying proactive or not, is really understanding the whole ecosystem and the objective that you're trying to address, and in trying to balance all of that. It's not just sometimes that you say, oh, I have a certain specific job that needs to be done, because it's research. Research is really, you never know, you are exploring different things, you are trying to deal with different personalities, and there are so many non-quantifiable metrics that come into picture, that having that kind of perspective is altogether, for me, what is key in helping me driving change, is really trying to keep my eye on what I want to do to supporting faculty research.
Excellent, thank you. Tom, would you like to go next?
Sure. I mean, I reiterate what Raleigh said, the same kind of thing. It's a mixture of both reactionary and evolutionary thinking for the future. But I'm really lucky at my university is that I have strong associate directors that can deal with the reactionary stuff, which frees up my time to interface to the administration and others to try to move forward. We used to be 20 years ago a high performance computing center. We're not a high performance computing center anymore. That's a small piece of our work. We're really supporting workflows, databases, protected environments for restricted data, all sorts of computing modalities beyond just running a turnkey system. And we don't run turnkey systems anymore. We build our own system. So it's really changed, and it's changing on a daily basis. I have my staff focusing on the cloud now and learning how to use that, even though it's not cost effective. There's a few users that still want to use it. And another challenge I have is I don't have a fancy title with my director position. I'm not a vice president. I'm not on the CIO track. I'm just a director. Fortunately, I'm a faculty member that's tenured, so I can't get pushed out. But trying to interface administration is a particular challenge, and we've been fighting for sustainability and growth for a long time. Hopefully this year we'll be successful, but I'll stop there so we can move on.
Great, thank you, Tom. Anne?
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and I'm going to actually push back a bit on this idea that reactive and responsive are the same. I think they're very different, because I think being responsive is often a strategic decision. But I can appreciate what you're asking in terms of there's kind of a continuum. And in fact, the way I kind of assess my own effectiveness is when I initiate a change or launch a new effort, I do tend to be more down at the reactive end or the operational end. And over time, if I can move to the more strategic part of the continuum, that tells me I am effectively implementing or sustaining the innovation or the change. But I think ultimately too, it's really a question of, you point to being proactive or entrepreneurial. And I also want to kind of push back on that term entrepreneurial, because in a higher ed environment, in an IT environment, I mean, let's face it, there's an economy there, but there's no market there. There's no, you're not going to create necessarily new economic value, but you can create a kind of value for your faculty. So understanding what that value is and how you're going to, again, operationally build it out and then sustain it as a service strategically really requires you to kind of move along that continuum fairly deliberately. So I mean, I would say, because UC Merced is a young institution, relatively speaking, and our cyber infrastructure research computing function is quite nascent, that I'm probably 50-50 on the continuum. It just sort of depends on, the issues that we're dealing with and the funding streams that are available at any given point.
Do you think any of that has to do with the fact that you are a young institution?
Oh, I think it does. I think it absolutely does. I mean, I would say my own experience over the last few years is, again, moving from a less operational reactive position to a more strategic one. But that's kind of like, on the grand scheme of things, every little new, I mean, whether it's a new grant, a new sponsor award, that allows us to build out capability, kind of brings you back down to needing to be fairly engaged at the ground level. And then over time, kind of to offload that to, your staff and your leadership, at that director level, or with faculty, even building capacity among faculty to kind of take over and drive an initiative. So that work happens kind of in the context of a group of people who presumably then continue to drive the initiative.
Got it. So Tom, do you feel like that has happened for you because of your longevity, right, in your area? Now you mentioned that you can rely very heavily on your associate directors. Do you find that what Anne says is what you kind of, that you grew that way?
I would say we grow every year because we're moving into new communities and new research groups, and they're stressing the staff because the new disciplines don't know anything about computing, and so we're having to really help handhold them to get them along. Yeah, we benefit from maturity that many of my staff have been here for 20 plus years, so they have a lot of experience, but we're still moving into new areas.
Got it. Okay, Wallace, how about?
Yeah, so I've worked throughout central IT my entire career. So when you say being reactionary and responsive, that's pretty much your life for most of that. The biggest thing for us and the biggest thing for me and my staff is to really try to break a bunch of IT folks out of that mold of being purely reactionary, of being maybe a little more strategic on the corporate side of the enterprise, but not necessarily being very close to the researchers and being very close to the research community and the direction and that where things are going. So I find it's been very helpful to actually break especially my leadership and even down to the level of senior engineers and the folks doing the technical architecture away from the day-to-day grind, get them away from that and actually have sessions where we talk about what is the strategy, what are we looking at long-term, and not to create a mission statement or a bunch of words on paper, but where do we actually think the technology is going? Where do we see the needs out within the campus community and in the broader community across New Zealand as well, when we start to talk about the communal HPC center that we run across the whole of New Zealand? Where are the institutions going? Where is the rest of the world going? Where is New Zealand in relation to that challenge? So it's really important to break those folks away from their day-to-day job, especially when you're representing or working within a centralized IT department, where it's very easy for folks to bury themselves in the day-to-day and the operational grind.
Great, thank you, Wallace. So which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Can you talk about initiatives and program development and give examples of when funds or FTEs come first, or the idea for a service or solution, et cetera, is the impetus for growth? And do you want to start?
Yeah, this is to me a kind of a question about supply and demand. I have always felt that it is best to create demand, because when you create demand, typically then you can supply, you can accrue the resources to build out the supply. However, you have to also kind of meter and pace that, because if you build too much demand too fast and you can't meet it, you risk losing credibility. Typically with sponsored research, the funds come. There's some underlying solution described that generates the funds. And then, so that would be a case where the funds come first. But, there have also been cases where we have started with the FTE because maybe we're doing a new hire and we, opportunistically realize somebody is available or in the pool who has a skill set that's really important. Again, it's kind of a dialectical process between the two. I do think that, if you start with a service, you've got to have some data points that underscore what's driving that service, that it actually, exists. It's not just kind of a whimsical idea or a solution described as a service. I think there's very much a difference between a service and a solution. If you have a solution, again, you need some data points about what the problem is. I think if you can explain, what is driving your solution, your service, that helps ensure that in some sense, it really doesn't matter where you start, because you have empirically documented the need, demonstrating the demand, behind which then you can accrue the resources to supply the, what's needed to meet the demand.
Great, thank you. Wallace, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I'll use an example that's happening right now today in our organization. So we have a effort that was spurred by some of the researchers within originally the comp sci department, that they wanted more GPU compute on the campus. So they went out and applied for a major equipment grant to get one of the NVIDIA big DGX systems in. So about midway through the process, of course, that got shot over to central IT, because it's going to be a system we're going to have to support. And we became involved in that process and helped them actually craft, and became a co-sponsor on that to the major equipment committee within the university. Now that is a demand that is definitely out there within the university. We have many departments that have their own mini GPU clusters spread out throughout the campus community. And really that partnership with the departments and that has really made it possible for us now to create a centralized service to that. So the demand was there. Then as soon as somebody came along asking for something that was larger than just in a desktop sitting in their lab, that's kind of what spurred it along. Now, once we get to there, we have the problem of how do we staff this and make it a centralized service. And it's always interesting to take academics along on the journey of how do you actually take something that would have been fairly simple to just buy and put in your lab for your use, and how do you actually make it into a centralized service that is fair and equitable and able to be shared across divisions. But taking those folks through that has actually been a very valuable thing, because now we have a pretty wide group now of academics who understand, for at least for that service, what it actually took to make that a centralized service. And they've actually now become great supporters of us and cheerleaders for us going forward, because they're like, oh, this is actually really hard to figure all this out and to set this up and to manage this and to think about life cycle and that sort of stuff. I mean, we just wanted to spend a couple $100,000 on some GPUs. We had no idea about this. So taking them along on that journey and has actually been really good of putting them inclusive into this, putting them right in the middle of it, and doing that and building that knowledge around there. And now I've got a group of academics that'll be great on our when a spot comes up on our next IT governance board, for instance.
Nice. Burali?
That's actually a good question. I think when I was listening to the responses, which I agree, it also reminded me a question that was asked to me when I was recruited at the University of Chicago 9 years ago to create the Research Computing Center. They did not have any centralized computing facility. And one of the questions of the member were asking was, how many FTE will you need to accomplish this? And when I told them all that I don't know, and I don't have an answer, because I cannot predict what are the needs at the University of Chicago. And I refuse to tell them that where I was coming from, the number of FTE or the experience I've accumulated there would be sufficient for me to predict the number of FTE. This is just to say that, like Anne said, is really a supply and demand question, which means the needs and the services that are required will drive what are the number of FTE that will be needed. And not only that, it's really critical to do it that way. And like Wallace also said, is to bring all the faculty and the leadership along with you in that journey so that they can understand. Otherwise, you're going to run into scalability issues where you start doing a good job with a small number of users, and you do such a good job, and before you know it, it doubles, but the number of staff are not doubling with the services. And that's exactly that education and bringing all that along is really critical. And I would really certainly agree with what Wallace said. But in a nutshell, I think the FTE growth is really something that had to be a functions of what is being required to deliver on all the service that are being asked of you. That's how, for me, I say it. And the needs of the faculty that are determining that, which means it's something that evolve with the demand.
Great, thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I'd say we try to be proactive and figure out what the needs are going to be. I mean, we were very early in the science DMZ space. Probably about 10 years ago, we deployed our first science DMZ, got a CC Star grant, one of the very early ones. Later, we realized the need for resources for restricted and sensitive data like HIPAA. We haven't gone to CUI or FSMA or CMMC yet, but we're moving that way. But we got an NIHS 10 grant to fund that effort. We realized our tape system would need to be replaced and it was super expensive. So we started to move into object storage. And one of the key aspects of this is that I try to keep part of my staff's time available to do novel and innovative things. They're not just reactionary to the day-to-day like in central IT. We're part of central IT, but I say we're an autonomous unit of central IT because we have completely separate infrastructure, network, staffing. We don't follow ITIL. We don't do certificates and all this other stuff. It's a completely small unit that communicates effectively compared to the, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 employees that are in our central IT at the University of Utah, which is a cruise ship that's hard to turn. We're more like a speedboat, agile and mobile. But trying to figure out anticipate what the needs of researchers will be. For example, learning about the cloud. I now have a lot of my staff trying to understand cloud and actually how hard it is compared to, I could probably go run in any one of your university's computers in a few minutes with my users, but to actually use the cloud, it's taken us weeks, months to get it to work. It's really hard. So yeah, trying to keep ahead of the trends and ahead of the technology and, ahead of understanding where the NSF and other agencies are going to go in terms of what they're going to fund, because you want to be early entry into those funding things. Otherwise, you can't be competitive.
Excellent. Yes, that's great. So next question, do you have a formal strategic plan process? If so, who is involved? What, if any, tools do you use to inform your strategic planning? For example, the EDUCAUSE Core Data Survey, the CAR Capabilities Model, the EDUCAUSE Top 10 IT Issues Facing Higher Ed, any of these tools. Murali, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I think I like all these tools that you mentioned, you listed. They are all really key and very important in helping you kind of give a little bit the foundation. However, I've always liked to customize my strategic planning based on the needs of my institution. So, for example, before Chicago, I came from a public university, and Chicago is a private. The needs really quite vary. So every 5 years, this is just a personal way of doing things for me. I always set myself sort of a strategic plan at a high level every 5 years. And then every year I try to put certain milestones on some of the major initiatives to achieve. And that was very key for me, in particular, when I was creating the RCC, because I was starting from zero and I wanted to bring it to some level. So it was helpful to have some sort of a milestone of things to achieve every year. And that also was very helpful in helping me control a little bit the growth. So that has been a little bit of a combination of some of these tools, but the key really, because when we're talking about satisfying faculty and keeping your leadership happy, the strategic planning, basically, it depends on all those elements that are really not quantifiable.
Do you engage with a governance group or some other advisory team?
Yes, I do. I have a faculty. I work with a lot of faculty advisory. And like I said, for me, you heard me saying the faculty needs drive what we do. Most all major initiatives, there's actually a core faculty that I bounce ideas from to them. And these are the one I usually will shape anything we do. I have, 4 or 5 different faculty committee that I work with, for example.
Great, thank you. Tom, do you want to reply? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. We have both a central IT visioning mission, which is kind of nebulous, and then I personally have done our own vision statements. I find it not so helpful in the sense that we have a mission and vision statement that's up on a web page, but that doesn't really inform my staff or my users about what we do. There was a question in the chat that I was writing a reply to about how do you make people aware of your services, and that's a hard thing. It requires very active, regular communications from any form necessary, from talking to IT professionals in colleges, to department chairs, to deans, to researchers, to anyone who will listen. And even though we've been actively communicating on a regular basis, there's still people on my campus that don't know they can get free computing from the research computing shop. They're still running machines in their own lab. So it just requires constant active effort. And so whether I have a mission and vision isn't as important as whether I'm making people aware of what we do and gaining the trust of the researchers. And actually our best advocate is other researchers say, you don't realize that CHPC is there and they're going to help. They can help you out. They can help you optimize your code. You don't have to have a student run your cluster. You can have them do it for free. So these kind of things are very important. So I'll stop there.
So just one question. Do you have any formal governance or committees advisory that you?
Yeah, we do. And I, as a faculty member, have been on many of these throughout the university's history for guiding computing. We used to have the biggest professors who used the most compute, but they tended to advocate for themselves more than they did advocate for the university. We moved to a model where we had committees that actually had people that cared about the university. Maybe not were as well known, and that worked much better. We also have a user advisory committee, and that's made up of users, and they help us advise on policy and so forth. We only meet once a month, and it's fairly lightweight. Mostly they listen to what we think we should do and say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, as opposed to telling us what to do. One thing that's kind of strange is that I don't really have a boss. In a sense, I do have a CIO, I have a department chair, but they don't tell me what to do. I get to choose what we want, and that's both good and bad, because if I choose the wrong direction to pursue, it's on me. But having the autonomy is also refreshing.
Yeah, that's good. Anne, would you like to answer?
Sure. Yeah. My thinking has evolved on strategic planning over the years. I think the technologies change so rapidly. The IT workforce challenges are so great that it's very difficult to kind of do a strategic plan that you can stick to with great discipline, given kind of the confounding variables in this area. It's good to have, I tend to focus on strategic outcomes. And again, at our campus, there is no broad campus strategic context. There is one developing, and that will provide some guideposts. But we really kind of focus on what are strategic outcomes, which focus on creating different kinds of value for our end users. When we do planning, though, our planning tends to be more visioning or scenario planning, kind of thinking forward in the future. Where do we need to position ourselves? And then we kind of can backward engineer the things that have to be accomplished to get there. And we do use some of those resources you noted in the question, largely for benchmarking and largely to make resource requests to leadership at the executive level to kind of show where we stand compared to our actual peers and our aspirational peers. On governance, I think, Tom mentioned, and this is exactly my experience as well, the challenge with governance is you had a group of people that become advocates for themselves individually. Faculty really kind of function that way because their research agenda is primary. So I think you kind of have to have a broad collection of advisory governance groups that give you input. You can kind of then get an average at that point. I think the other challenge with governance that I've found out, I've encountered over the years is depending on what you're governing, the degree of understanding that your group has a deep understanding about your work reflects the value of the input you get from them. And so, if you have a group that does not really understand some of the challenges you face, you spend a lot of time educating them at the risk of getting, input that isn't really that useful. So, I think there was a question in the chat about, let's see, where was it? About, the challenge of kind of broadly hearing about the needs of researchers. I think that's what, we really have to do. And it's extremely time consuming. I mean, it really is a combination of listening to the formal bodies. In our case, there's Academic Senate has a research computing committee. We have a small group of faculty. So there are these formal bodies that we reach out to, but then you've also got to look at, the kind of demand requests that are coming in, the kind of service needs that there are, the one-on-one conversations, the faculty that are getting the large grants. So you've really got to be able to put the time in to look very broadly at the voices that you're hearing and then synthesize that into some set of actionable objectives.
So in a case, Anne, for you, with a small team and a young team, at a relatively new institution, do you grow your staff to be able to think that way? Is that something that inherently you develop all up and down the chain of those folks who report to you?
I do, yes. I mean, that's actually kind of reflective of my particular leadership style, perhaps, and my own academic training as an anthropologist. So I tend to, try and really look at things through an anthropological, ethnographic lens about what's the narratives we're hearing out there, which ones are actually true and substantiated, which ones are maybe not actually empirically valid, but in fact are held by the faculty and so reflect a real concern. And yeah, I have tried to work with my staff to think that way, but then the key is to take that information and convert it into, a service, an initiative, an aspiration, a strategic outcome, whatnot. And that's a completely different process. The process that I really use is this. It's a 4-step process. There's a period of discovery that has to occur. That's that, like, what exactly is the problem here? What exactly is the phenomena? Then there is kind of a period of collaboration. So that's validating an understanding among the key stakeholders that, in fact, this is the phenomenon. This is the problem we're solving. This is the need we have. This is the direction we want to go. Then there's road mapping that. So you put it into a plan. Is it a multi-year thing? Do I need, $1.3 million or is 10,000 enough? Who's in charge of what? What are the tasks? And then it's execution and tracking that execution and making sure you end up where you thought you were. And often, of course, like many things in life, it's iterative. But I really think that those 4 key steps are essential for the organization to carry out, and individuals in leadership roles increasingly kind of have to abstract the information they're getting and kind of align to those 4 steps if you're going to actually do anything, as opposed to just kind of brainstorming about it.
Right. Great. Thank you. Wallace?
Yeah, so the University of Otago here is very heavily uses the 3 p.m. process. And that was being applied to IT when I got here in approximately the same way that it was applied to capital development or campus planning or something like that. So works very well when you're building a building and you can think out many years. But when it comes to IT, that was actually causing major issues in that, it'd be 2 or 3 years down the line before anything would actually kick off in your initiative. You get a lot of money that way, you get a lot of buy-in. It was a very good process for things, but it wasn't very fast. And so that was causing problems for IT and great problems, especially for research enabled IT or IT that's enabled by research. So we've actually set aside some different pots of money that is able for that, and a different process that's much quicker and much faster turnaround. One of the interesting things on that is the governance behind it. So we have the IT governance board, which is kind of the master governance board over ITS. And then we've got actually a subset of that, which is the e-research advisory group. Now the e-research advisory group, what we've started to do is when I go and do what I call roundings, which is going out and talking to each individual head of department, attending department meetings, those sorts of things, to get that feel for the pulse of the campus and what is needed and what's going on. We actually take somebody from the IT governance board or from the e-research advisory board, depending on the topic of the day, with me to those as much as possible. And I often very much try, and I'm kind of chuckling at some of the things about academics on governance boards representing themselves or their division or their lab more than they do their constituency, their campus. One of the ways I'm working to get around that, we'll see how well it works, is as I said, I take those folks with me. And I often make them attend meetings that are outside of their discipline. So if I've got somebody who's heavily in the health sciences area, I'll take them to a meeting with the humanities department and that sort of thing, to really kind of force them into that, to get that broader view outside of their building, outside of their castle, within the campus community, and build a more robust governance board, because governance boards can be extremely useful or they can be extremely burdensome. So we're trying to make ours as useful as possible by deeply including them in the processes, by getting them that deep level of understanding as to what we're going through. But the carrot in all of that is that I have a big pot of money that can be drawn against for research initiatives that are enabled by IT. I am just as interesting as some of the government granting agencies, because I have that money that can be used. I don't come into the year with a plan for it. That is up to the campus community to define what that plan is. And the more involved you are, the more chance you have of getting access to that and making a case for that funding.
Interesting, thank you. Our next question is, how do diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, and succession planning figure into your strategic planning? Raleigh, do you want to start?
Yes, that's a very loaded and questions, and in particular, the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion is one that is really great, of great importance to me, that has been dear to my heart, not throughout my career as a recipient, but also in leadership, managing a center where I can be also on the other side. But the only thing I would also want to point out that has been quite interesting, in particular in recent years, in the last couple of years, is it has gained a lot of attention recently because of a lot of events in our society. But I would argue that what we are also observing when referring to that, and this is one thing I just want to really point out that is really a big concern to me, is we are seeing a lot of talk about window dressing, making sure that an institution is doing something about DEI, but in reality, it's all just superficial. But the discussions about the root causes on how this should be really integrated, you really find less of that. I think for me, that's a really great concern. And I hope when we talk about this is really focusing more addressing the root causes as an integral part of an ingredient of all any strategic planning. And that's not only just at the level of a center, but this is really had to come from a leadership of all the institutions, because if it does not
Uh-oh, I think we froze. Raleigh, I think you froze.
Claire, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My internet is a little bit weaker. I was trying to just kind of address, I was almost concluding that it's really about addressing root causes and involving the decision maker of leadership and institution to make sure that those are part of the ingredient of all the activities. As a manager, of course, you play a key role in implementing some of those. And then, of course, by including some of those diverse and equity inclusion initiatives is a good way to sustain sustainability of your activity. So this is a topic I can talk for long, but let me just pause right there.
Great, thank you. Tom, would you like to go?
Sure. I mean, DEI is all very important. It's dear to my heart as well. It's a challenge in Utah. But you know, you brought up the succession planning, and that's my biggest nightmare right now. Is I've got an aging staff that are highly competent, so we hired a new administrative assistant who's kind of learning the ropes of the associate director, so she can take over doing all the financials and the staff issues. And you know, you have a later question that talks about the student program at Utah, which I'll answer right now, because the student program we have is also really important because we use this as a seed for potential future hires or at least new jobs. And our student program is a special one. We try to attract freshmen in various departments, from CS to business, informatics, or others, and bring them in as work study students for 20 hours a week, up to 20 hours a week and more during vacations in the summer, and train them in topics of computational science support, such as, say, object storage or Kubernetes or other things. And these students are, originally we used to hire students. It was really hard because we would just randomly interview people and hire them. They weren't very successful. So now we have, with Central IT, a pre-screening interview process where we create a database of students with their various skills and interest levels. And then when we bring those students, the pre-selected students, into interview, we want to hire all of them. And then the other thing we learned is that my technical people don't really know how to interact with students, or they didn't when they first started. So we have a third person facilitator that serves kind of to bridge between the student and the technical person to kind of do the weekly or bi-weekly evaluations and so forth. And we evaluate them every 2 weeks. And if they're not performing, we boot the student out. If they're performing well, we boost their salary a bit. And this has been very successful. We have about 15 students now. All of them get really great internships in the summer, so we lose them. They go to Google or Facebook, but then they come back in the fall renewed with new stuff for us to know about, the leading edge technologies and things. So it's been a really fun program. And we've hired a couple of those students to be permanent staff members. Others have gone out to very high paying jobs, because a CS degree alone doesn't give you that much. A CS degree with real computational science support experience makes you very hireable. I'll stop there.
Excellent, nice, thank you. Wallace, do you want to reply?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll kind of continue on the thread that Tom was going down there around students. So this particular question is one that could be an entire session all to itself, by far. But so when it comes to workforce planning, kind of that sustainability and succession planning, which are the two I'll hit right off the bat here. That is a very difficult thing. So we have, I've been at 5 other universities, 4 of which in the US, and everybody has problems recruiting staff, qualified IT staff across all disciplines within IT. But here in the southern part of New Zealand, fairly far away from anything else, we have a much larger issue with that. It is extremely difficult to do so. And we also have the problem of US companies hiring people who can work remotely and live in Dunedin and pay the US dollar and instantly make 3 times even some of the highest salaries I can pay. So that's an interesting problem there. But what we've done is we've really started to work heavily on student internships. And some of the student internships that we've done are actually full-time positions. They come and work for us for a year. They actually take a year off of their studies. It is a paper, so they get academic credit for it. But we actually have a deal worked out with a couple of the departments like information science and comp science, school of business, where they come and they work for us full-time for a year. They're full-time employees, benefits, all nine yards. They really get that experience. And those are the folks that we're able to build that pipeline of folks to hire out of. I'm also looking for a lot of these roles. We've just kind of given up on even finding folks that come into those roles qualified. And we're very heavily recruiting based on the attitudes and the personality and the interest that people show in the particular positions. And we will train them, we will build them. We realize there is not a pipeline for those people within New Zealand. And given the world situation at the moment, we can't rely on importing people from overseas like we have in the past, where overseas recruitment was. So with my staff, if you look over the last 4 or 5 years within IT, 95% of the staff that we hired in came from overseas. So that's a pretty daunting number when you then are in a country who has handled COVID well, but by handling it has basically locked out the rest of the world. So you can't bring folks in, and so all of a sudden overnight that recruiting pipeline dries up. And it didn't just dry up for me, it dried up for all the commercial companies in New Zealand as well, who then of course start poaching staff from each other, and it's an interesting environment that we're in here. I will say on the diversity and inclusion front, one of the very pleasant things of being in New Zealand is the fact that it is an extraordinarily diverse society. It's a very young country overall. And has been all mostly populated by folks who have immigrated here in the fairly recent past. So we have a fairly diverse population here. But one of the interesting things that I found is we have to be very aware of that and cognizant of that in our recruiting processes, because often we have English is not the first language of most of our applicants. It's not the first language necessarily of most of our students even. So we have, so you really have to change how you view that recruiting process and how you're advertising the jobs and how you're interviewing, and that to really get at the core of what is this person capable of, what is their attitude, how are they going to work once they get in, because you are dealing with a massive breadth of cultures and backgrounds and lived experiences here, which is quite frankly refreshing and a wonderful thing. But it does require you to think differently and work differently when it comes to how you recruit staff and work with staff and to think about that.
Great. Thank you, Wallace. Anne?
Yeah, higher ed doesn't do succession planning very well, particularly in IT. And I think that's going to have to change given the stresses on the IT labor market. We are in a part of the country that is relatively rural, but yet, 2-3 hours from San Francisco, Silicon Valley, LA. So, if you're an IT professional and you want to make money, you're going to go there, not here. On the other hand, we also are in a very diverse area as well. In fact, I would say that my IT organization, the minority of individuals are white males, if you look at the numbers. But that's the problem, I think, is that even though we have a very diverse environment and, much similar to what Wallace described, you've got to activate that diversity, which means getting people to speak up and disagree around their differences in ways that are productive and create synthesis. And that's a real challenge. And so we really do try to raise awareness around diversity as a value, as an input to good decision making, to excellence, but that to get that outcome, you often need to kind of encounter something that might be unfamiliar and different, and be able to articulate those differences in ways that are positive. And that's kind of the whole mindset of diversity, as opposed to thinking about it as some initiative. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, again, thinking of my role, is people need different things. They need to be managed differently. They come in at different points of their careers with different interests and motivations. So you've got to be really cognizant of, giving people different degrees of resource and access depending on what they need, and you've got to take the time to understand that. And again, I think Wallace made this point, or maybe it was Tom. Like when I hire, I hire for talent, not skill, because the skill is probably going to change. And a talented person is going to be able to roll with those changes. So, I think this is an area of, kind of organizational, it's an organizational value. And just having a diverse environment isn't enough, again, if you can't sort of activate that diversity into some meaningful, value for the community.
That's great. Thank you, Anne. So moving on, how do you communicate with campus leadership about research, computing, and data? Do you have regular or built-in mechanisms to share? Tom, do you want to start?
Not my favorite topic, because I have not been so successful with this. I have monthly meetings with my boss, which is technically the CIO. We used to report to the VPR. The VPR, I'm lucky if I talk to them once a year, and they tend to dismiss us, even though they like us. We're not their problem. And so I've had a real difficulty. We've had a flat funding for the last decade, essentially, and I've been pushing. We finally have some change this year, likely. I won't know for another few weeks, but that the senior vice president, Dan Reed, has allowed central IT to actually support us. We haven't been supported by central IT. Typically, we've been supported by F&A out of the discretionary F&A pool. So now central IT can use some of its funds. We'll see if that works. But communication is always a challenge. And I mentioned it earlier in my discussions, I don't have a title like vice president that allows me to talk to the Council of Academic Deans or the senior leadership on a regular basis. I wish I did, because they know what we do, but they don't know our problems, daily problems.
So Tom, when you said the VPR tends to dismiss you because you're not their problem, is it because you don't report up to them, or because the issues, they don't see those issues as their
I
issue?
think we're too successful. When your animals are dying because your vivarium is too old, you replace the vivarium. If I started coming in with daily failures, that researchers were mad about what we do. Brawley asked me this question: how do you deal with the 10% of faculty that are mad at you all the time? I said, I fixed the problem. We don't have faculty that are mad at us. We've been able to work with them, even the challenging ones, to make sure that we're providing the services they need, or making them aware of what the limitations are in terms of funding, service models, response, that we can't possibly bend over special for them because we don't have the resources to do that. Not the right word choice. Sorry about that.
Anne, do you want to take it next?
Yeah, so I kind of nag insistently. That's one strategy. There are more formal ones, like meeting regularly with the deans or the VC of research. There's the obvious things like tying, needs or outcomes to the mission. I can appreciate Tom's comment about the challenge of being too successful insofar as, yeah, if you're able to run kind of an effective lean shop, then everyone thinks, oh, fine, they're good, and that's kind of an unintended consequence of being successful. I do make use of those 10% of faculty who can never be satisfied by trying to build alliances with them, because an angry tenured faculty can be a real asset for me, because they can go in and rage on my behalf and not necessarily assume the risks that I might have to. And typically where we do have faculty who are unhappy, there's usually a good reason. I mean, those 10% they're not complaining because we've deliberately ignored them. It's because their needs are somehow outside of the scope of what we can address. And so I see that as a really good opportunity to sit down with those faculty who love an argument. Faculty are trained to argue based on data. So if you're willing to go in and go toe to toe with faculty and have an argument, you typically walk out of there with an ally who understands, where the constraints are, what the data is around the situation, what the inputs are, and why you're making your priorities. They may not agree with you, but if you can get understanding around the kind of critical framework, that's actually a win. So, it is very much this idea of keeping leadership aware is a combination of evangelical strategies, advocacy, haranguing, and educating. And I think it's just never finished.
Great, thank you, Anne. Wallace?
So I never ever go into a funding negotiation without having faculty beside me, behind me, around me, or even in front of me. So that has been one of the strategies that I've used here, and it's worked fairly well. As I said, I've kind of created that environment where I am also, ITS has become another funding agency for researchers to come and get funding for projects and for things that involve anything with e-research and technology. So we've really kind of enabled that and made it so that folks want to come with us. And we've done that also through huge amounts of transparency around the amount of money that we spend on things. And here it is. There's quite a bit of money there. What would you like to see us spending that on, and get them at the table and to help them and have them help direct us towards those means at the end of the day. The other thing with actually kind of getting back to the amount of communication is that we can never do enough communication. And we need to make sure that we're doing communication at the right level. So one thing that I've seen throughout my career is that often communication especially around resources within IT departments, that's a very top-down, trickle-down type of communication. Well, as a CIO, I told the head of department, or I told the AVP for whatever about this service. I don't know why his or her staff don't know about this. So we've actually changed that model to really a bottom-up model, to where we are communicating. We're getting communication set up with the folks that are running the labs, with the grad students, with the postdocs, with the and that about what the resources are that are out there. We're getting out to be where we are in new faculty initiations. We're in those sorts of things, so that we can feed into that layer what the capabilities are of the infrastructure and of the support services that are there. Because if you just tell the folks at the top, it's no different than if somebody tells you something. You're like, you take 100% of that in, or maybe you take 50% of that in. What you then pass on is maybe 10%. And then the next person passes on 10% of that, and the message just diminishes and diminishes as it goes down, is what we find. So we've really tried to flip that around.
Thank you, Wallace. Barali?
Yes, I have to say in my case, the communication and relationship with the leadership is pretty good. I'm maybe fortunate to sit within the unit of the Vice Provost for Research, which means I meet with her on a weekly basis. So there's really a constant communications, and she's really very much involved with what we do. Even the prior vice president for research, they all have been really quite involved. So that on that side, I think this is something that has been quite a big success to me, which is something we set up from the beginning. And the reason for me was I did push from day one that the added value of the research computing is not just the giving access to hardware. It's really about everything we do in enabling research. I think for me, that's the core mission, the core message that I usually really try to insist on, because otherwise, when it's just considering associated with just the guy who maintained the hardware, for me, that's really not understanding what we do. It's beyond that. And I think for me, that also one of the reasons from the beginning was it's a unit within the research enterprise of the university. Having that also, it gives you also the ability of forging some of those relationships as well with the dean. So that's some of the governance that I mentioned. I meet on a quarterly basis, basically, with all the dean, because as we discuss, understand the university priorities, you need to get them also for all those units, all those divisions and colleges, because that's how help you forge your strategic planning. I think for me, my philosophy has always been one that the result should speak to that leadership more than my words. And one of the things actually I tend to use as a metric, because all my previous bosses say they get less and less faculty coming complaining to them than before. For them is really a big plus, because that's also that communication. So the more I obfuscate all those complaints before they can reach out to them, the more also it free up a lot of headaches for them. So it's really a good two-way relationship, which means you have to have that communication to even be aware of all those issues before they reach out to them. So when it's really about faculty happiness and what you are able to produce that is in alignment with the university priority.
I like that. That boils it down very clearly. Faculty happiness. Our next question is, how do you stay on top of technologies, emerging research trends, for example, big data visualization needs, etc.? How has the emphasis on compliance data and security issues like ransomware affected your planning and approach to RCD support? I know that all of you have touched on it a little bit through some of your other questions, but maybe we could focus a little bit and talk just a little bit more on that. Tom, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm, as a faculty member, I think I'm fully aware of what the world is and what it needs and what the new trends are, but actually I don't know anything. I really rely on my staff, and so my staff have the ability, and one of the reasons they work at the university is because of flex time, and because we give them the opportunity to do cool and interesting things. They make a lot less than they do in industry, but if they need to take off the afternoon or blow out for picking up their kids, whatever, they can just go do that. So it's through them that I really get exposed, and through the larger community, through the campus champions, through CARC, the People Network, through others, where we're talking about the latest trends. Like the next systems facing call in CARC is going to be on control and classified information, CMMC. This is a big issue for a lot of universities. We try to reach compliance for data policies and so forth. So just trying to be a good member of the community, of both me and my staff, so that they can be aware of what the current trends are. Also being involved with NSF panels is also very helpful. You can learn about what the latest ideas going in are. Any way we can learn, that's what I try to do.
That's great. Yeah. Anne?
Yeah, this idea of how do I stay on top of technologies, I think Tom said, I don't feel like I do that very well most of the time. The tools, the platforms, the stacks, God, they're just like evolving at such rapid pace. So really do try and rely on what my staff say is important, and then kind of triangulate that with the community and other resources. And a lot of it is kind of deciding what things am I not going to care about. Am I not going to learn right now? I'm not going to defer, so that I can kind of dive deep enough into the things that I do need to stay on top of, to focus on. And, around the issues with security, I think, what I'm finding, we're having a lot of discussions on campus around, for example, endpoint management and the way, and data security, and the way that impacts faculty and their research is quite variable, but almost in every case, it means increasingly that they have fewer degrees of freedom about how they do something. They can still do what they want to do, and they can still get to the same outcome they want, but often how it happens is becoming increasingly restricted. It's usually a judgment call as to how well I and my CISO can enforce a given practice. And that means a lot of frank discussions around, okay, if you don't want to do it this way, now you're going solo. We can all probably remember when everybody needed to keep an email server under their desk because that had, like some, incredible, sense of importance to individuals. And then it became a commodity and no one really cares. I think, we have a similar situation with security, in that if you want to go off and do it your way and not be conscientious of the institutional liability and risk you are creating for yourself and others, in higher ed, you can do that, but then you're going to have to bear the consequences. So helping people realize that trade-off is really the crux of the conversation. And I have found that once faculty do realize that they can still do what they want to do, there may be a couple of different steps. There may be, an added step. There may be kind of a shift in how the sequence of the steps. If we give them support and help them kind of make that transition, then usually we can find a middle road. But that's going to increasingly, I think, be a conversation we have to facilitate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anne. Barali?
Yeah, so these are two questions here. How do I keep up, stay on top of technology? Like Tom and Anne said, is really surround yourself with a great team. I think it's really difficult to be an expert in everything. So, but if you have a very great team and be humble to learn from them, I think that's the way I usually learn. I think for me, they are very inclusive, and then make sure that they understand that you value their contribution. I think that has been really the biggest source for me for my keeping up with technology. And then also similarly, we learn quite a bit from our community. We are part of so many various communities. I think those communities it's a really great resources. I can never emphasize that much, and encouraging the staff that you really need to be part and also contribute. And then also third is the relationship we have with hardware and the various hardware software vendors. And in many cases, you have a non-disclosure agreement with them that they really give you a presentation of what is coming in down the pipeline. And then those people also really, you learn quite a bit of what is coming away. So those are the three ways that I try to keep myself on top of technology, and in my spare time also trying to read as much as I can. Related to the question of security and compliance, that's a topic that, again, that is really have emerged to be really important. Actually, 4 years ago, the University of Chicago embarked in what we called a secure research data strategy. And this was not just security, but it was also data privacy and security altogether. We were really trying to look at it more holistically, because when you talk about security, some people think in terms like ransomware, but the other people also talk about HIPAA, QE. So there are different pockets of needs. but we don't think of it more globally, university-wide. How do we provide services that will help faculty on one, understand their roles and responsibilities? And because at the end of the day, they want to understand they are not adverse doing the right thing, but as long as it does not delay or impact too much their research, which means, can you create our service in such a way that help those faculty focus on doing their research, but yet in a secure environment? So, and then two, how do we also communicate that to the wider audience? Because sometimes people are not even aware that they are dealing with data that is exposing themselves to vulnerability. So there's all those aspects that, and again, with the relationship we have with the deans and the leadership, actually, they actually gave us that charge and the support necessary to lay out that strategy that led to what we deployed, what we call a secure data enclave, where now we have different level of security services depending of protection levels and what is required, because you don't also want to ask a person who really does not need too much security to force that person to be using the highly secure environment. So there's really different layers that really require also different services and etc. And then the only thing that also we are now trying to inject is, and I'll be happy to hear from my colleagues on the panel, how do you also address the issue of ethics? Because that is also in particular AI is becoming also the important on how to address that in addition to their security and privacy.
That's excellent. And that's a whole nother, right? A whole nother topic on in and of itself. Wallace?
Yeah, so keeping up to date on technologies and trends, and especially once you kind of get to a level of the organization where you have a very broad broad swath of things that you are supporting from, I like to think I know a lot about computer networks. That's my background. But now I have everything from HPC to corporate compute to storage to desktop to just the entire broad swath. And I can't keep on top of all of it all the time. And so it really does rely on your staff. But staff is only part of the equation, because you have to actively make sure that your staff have the time and feel that they have the time and the support to go out and keep themselves up to date in their particular fields, to spend the time to attend the online sessions, to do the reading, to do the research, to have a lab environment potentially to tinker on with stuff, and to make sure that we as leadership are really promoting that is of value to the institution, that you do that. And that if I've got somebody who just sits at their desk all day and cranks out work requests and projects and that sort of stuff, that there's actually a problem there, that person is at risk of falling behind, is at risk of pigeonholing themselves into a particular technology stack or something like that, and doesn't have that broader view. And that really is on the leadership, both at my and our level, but also at the direct line managers level, to make sure that is known by the staff, that this is you need to be doing this. This is something we want you to do, that we put this in your position descriptions, that we put this into your evaluations, how much time you're spending on keeping yourself up to date with technology, and really flipping the script on what it means to be an engineer within ITS and what the value is of our internal staff. So getting folks away from those turn the crank type of operations and saying the value of the full-time internal staff of the university is to be able to look ahead, to innovate, to architect, to design, to do those sorts of things, to train, to do all the unique special things that you can't get a contractor to do, or you can't hire in a company to do thing X. So that's really been a big push for us, is to make sure to do that. And we definitely don't do enough of that. And that is a younger thing within, especially this organization. But that's something that I think is very important to push, that people have that time, that they feel like they have. I thought they have that time, that they feel like they have that time, and that they feel that time that they spend doing that stuff is valued. So, running sessions of, hey, you've been learning about this thing, or you attended this thing. Could you present to a couple of the other folks in the department? Could you run a little session on it? Could you do, write it up and send it out if you're more comfortable with that? But to kind of, and then reward that, so that others see that, oh, actually, this person attended this conference, wrote up a little thing, and people read it, and the leadership actually commented on that and rewarded it and say, that's wonderful, I'd love to talk to you more about that, or where do you think we can apply this in the organization? Kind of that constant feedback, because oftentimes as leaders we are very much, system X is broken, it took too long to get back up, and the metrics is how many tickets you're able to churn through and those sorts of things. So we have to be very cognizant of rewarding that activity if you want it to happen.
Great. Thank you, Wallace. That was great. I just want to turn everybody's attention to the chat to make sure that you're seeing. We've got a lot of good information there, and some good questions. We'll come back to those questions if we have time. But I've entered all the chat into the running doc that's associated with this session, so you can still find it after the session. Our next question is, please talk about a significant program development in your group and how it came about. I think we've heard Tom talked a little bit about the student program. Borelli talked about the secure research data strategy and the data enclave. I think those are interesting, but Anne, do you want to talk about this from the perspective of developing, really, I mean, as a brand new university, you probably have not just a single program, but you have maybe a different take on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I indicated earlier, we have really built out this function within our central IT unit, and that opportunity came about when a dean was really unable to build out that capacity within his school, despite that being a fairly normal model. But the challenges were around, again, recruitment and kind of getting enough scale to have impact. So we built an alliance that eventually allowed me to provide that support to his school and then broaden that to the other schools as well. But nevertheless, I'll say that there is a tension there. I would not be surprised. I mean, if I'm, if our unit continues to grow and becomes wildly successful, say in the next 10 to 15 years, probably after I've retired, I wouldn't be surprised if it breaks away and becomes, an autonomous unit and functions much as Tom describes. Because I think in the end, it doesn't really matter the organizational structure, as long as the relationships are there and the right services are in place. There's pros and cons for central and decentral. It's a bit of a red herring to spend too much time on that, I think. But the challenge of building out the functionality has been, you've covered many of the things around communication, pipeline of talent, strategic versus operational. I think we have just launched a recharge model. I mean, like who celebrates that, right? But it is kind of a mark of maturity and necessity, and has, raised the level of discourse across campus around, well, what exactly, do we want to build out here and how are we going to fund it? So it is really capacity building, and the scalability is a challenge, and then the sustainability of that scalability, institutionalizing, the innovation, so to speak, is its own set of challenges. So, I can't, it's hard to step back and say, well, we've been successful, because I think in many ways we're still trying to figure out foundationally what are the essential building blocks that meet our campus needs. And COVID has really kind of distracted us for the last year and a half in that regard as well. Over the course of the past year, we have moved into a new modular data center built specifically for research computing. But, managing that data center, and kind of building out the services for co-location for faculty, is kind of like another heavy lift. So, I like what Wallace said about, the importance of play, because even though I feel like sometimes we are, so resource strapped in comparison to our ambitions, it is so important to give people time to play and experiment, because that is so renewing in the IT profession. I think it's how new knowledge is, realized and codified. And I think that would be one of the foundational principles, I would say, for building out any new program or any new effort, is build into your plan, the capacity to play around with ideas and report back on what's working, what isn't.
Great, thank you. Tom, do you want to say anything more either about the student program or something different?
No, I mean, I'd say one of our current major focuses for a long time has been to try to automate things and monitor things, so we know when it fails. We want to be able to automatically start it up. We don't want to have pets, which are special purpose instruments that require a lot of hand holding and feeding, special care and feeding. So we're trying to get rid of those. We're trying to look for federated identity so that we can let our collaborators in without having to give them a university ID or a university affiliate. Those are kind of big areas that we've been pushing forward on, as have many others in the space.
Yeah, most definitely. I concur with all of those things. Virali?
The only thing I just wanted to add to Secure Data Enclave and Secure Research Data is that I always really for the past 4 years has been the ability for us to work with 4 other different units. So the initiative between us, the University Office of Legal Counsel, the University Chief Security Office and Privacy Officer, as well as Central IT and ourselves. So at the beginning, and of course, you count also the RRB and all those people. So it's been really a joy to see how completely different units that typically do not even talk to each other could work together, get out to implement it as a team. I think for me, that's has been the biggest highlight in this whole exercise. But among other initiatives that might be worth also sharing with the community here, we've been spending also quite a bit of time about this question related to cloud. And we built a platform, we call it Skyway, that typically now you can basically, the same thing, you could submit your job on your local campus cluster. You can basically submit to any of the commercial cloud vendor, AWS and GCP, basically the same way, but just changing a little bit just the partition, basically considering the cloud vendor as a partition. The reason that has been, at least for us, customized is because also we pretty much basically abstract the complexity for the faculty to learn how to use those cloud resources. And then we went even a step further, of trying as much as we can, mounting their local storage whenever it's possible on those resources in the cloud. I think that has been also another little pet project of ours that we are really, the faculty are gaining a little bit happy about it. And the only thing in that particular project is just the billing part is something we don't want to be involved with. Basically, that billing is just kind of pushed to them. As long as for me, you don't send me a bill, I don't see. Basically, that's the only thing that they just need to agree to get the bill directly and control whatever they are doing. The rest we take care of you.
Nice. Nice that you were able to push that off, because that's the biggest headache probably. Right. Wallace?
Yeah, so the one I was going to talk about for this particular question was the student internship program and how valuable that has been. But since I've already covered that, I'll do a little bit on another one topic here. So the University of Otago is going through a process that a lot of universities go through, which is either centralizing or decentralizing all the things. And the University of Otago is centralizing all the things. So there's been a concerted effort from the vice chancellor's level down to sweep across the campus with a strategic staffing review and centralize anything that should be centralized on campus. And one of those things was ITS. So IT at the university has been typically very decentralized. In the SSR, all those staff that were IT or IT adjacent within departments got made central IT staff. And all of a sudden the IT staff of central IT ballooned from 40 or 50 to 200 overnight. But you have all these folks who are used to doing departmental IT. So one of the things that we're on right now, and one of the very interesting things that's actually paid huge dividends beyond that, after I set the stage there, is that we have an IT transition project that's ongoing, where I have a staff of approximately 15 engineers, programmers, analysts, BAs, all of them that are going out and department by department are going through the IT systems that department has and centralizing what they can and turning off things that don't need to be there and dealing with security issues and all those sorts of things. And that's been a hugely valuable effort because we are out actively in all of these departments doing this. We've got the support of the Vice Chancellor's Executive Council down to do this work. And it's been really eye-opening for Central IT to see what the actual needs are of the campus and basically pull open the covers on everything as our engineers go out and open up all of these systems and see how they work and what they do. And although, of course, there's a lot of resistance at first, it's never a pleasant process. The IT portion of that, as we've gone out to the departments, has actually been extremely well received because our engineers are going out there and finding people who, it's like, well, why are you doing it this way? We can do it over here. We can do it like this. We can build you this thing. We can create this service, that sort of thing. And the departments are like, oh, that's wonderful. If I would have known you guys could have done this, had you do this years ago, why am I doing this myself? But it's really actually been a surprisingly good effort across campus, and having those dedicated resources who are deep within the technology stack, who are able to communicate well. So we took secondments across the central IT staff for people to put in this particular unit that works independently of any other division within IT. And we picked all the people who were good communicators, who were good technical devs, but were good communicators and were able to talk and be friendly and work with people and staff. And that unit has become an extraordinarily powerful tool for us, to which we've even started to, I've had to really resist the urge to take them and put them onto other special projects and that, because there's a lot of really good staff there. So that's been a model that's worked. I didn't set it up, it was in existence but when I came here, but it is surprisingly powerful and working quite well.
Congratulations. That sounds like a great, it's exciting that process is working for your university. That's excellent. So we're at 13 minutes after the hour, and I'm sorry we didn't have more time to open up questions to the attendees, but I think that we'll point everybody to the the document for this session. It's listed, it's linked in the on the website, and I put it in the chat a couple times, I think. But I'd like to thank all of our panelists, the wealth of knowledge that you brought. I was fast and furious trying to take notes. I couldn't take notes fast enough because all of the gems that you had offered up. But thank you, Anne, Raleigh, Wallace, Tom, for your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Claire. That was, I appreciate the time, and I'm going to follow up with my colleagues here because they gave me a lot of good ideas as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everybody, also for organizing this. Has been wonderful.
Thanks. It's been wonderful to see and chat with everybody.
Henry, putting it back to you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.